I came home one evening to a sight I could never have imagined. There, in my front yard, was a twisted pile of broken glass, metal shards, and splintered solar panels. It looked like a tornado had torn through my property. But no, there was no tornado. Just Karen. She stood there, arms crossed, a smug smile on her face, as if she had just solved world hunger, not committed daylight robbery. "You were warned," she said, shaking her head with a look of feigned disappointment. "The HOA does not allow unsightly additions to the neighborhood." Unsightly additions? My solar panels were state-of-the-art, sleek and barely visible from the road. Meanwhile, Karen's house looked like it had been stuck in a bad 1980s sitcom, complete with plastic flamingos and an oversized army of gnomes standing guard over her front lawn. I clenched my fists, trying to hold my temper. "You just destroyed my legally installed property. You know this is illegal, right?" Karen let out a patronizing sigh, the kind reserved for toddlers throwing tantrums. "It's not illegal when the HOA enforces its rules. And I have full authority here, Alex. Maybe next time, you'll think twice before going against us." I stared at her, my pulse hammering in my ears. I had read horror stories about HOAs, but I never imagined I'd be living in one, especially not under a woman who seemed to believe she was the queen of the cul-de-sac. "What about my money?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Who's paying for this?" Karen gave me a sickly sweet smile. "Not my problem. Maybe next time follow the rules." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me standing there, staring at the wreckage of what had been my prized energy solution. The worst part? The HOA had no jurisdiction over solar panels in this state. Karen had no legal ground to stand on. But I knew why she did it. She thought I couldn't fight back. That was her first mistake. 2 days later, I sat in my home office, sipping coffee and staring at my laptop screen, where legal documents were scattered across multiple tabs. I had been doing some research, deep research. I was looking for any loophole, any small crack I could exploit to hit back at Karen and the HOA. What I found nearly made me spit my drink across the room. It all started with a property deed. When I bought my house, the land had been part of a larger private property sale. The previous developer had installed a private power system for the HOA before dissolving their ownership. This meant in layman's terms that the grid supplying power to every single house in this neighborhood didn't belong to the HOA. It belonged to me. A slow grin spread across my face as the realization hit me like a thunderclap. Karen had thought she had power over me. She had no idea that I literally had power over her. My heart started to race as I realized the full extent of my discovery. I controlled the power grid. Legally, I could do whatever I wanted with my property, including shutting off service to anyone I deemed unworthy. It wouldn't take much, just a couple of switches, a few adjustments to the grid, and then, one glorious night, Karen and her little HOA minions would get a taste of what it felt like to be powerless. I decided to play it smart. I wasn't going to act immediately. No, this was a game of patience. I wanted to let Karen bask in her victory for a while. Watch her strut around the neighborhood, acting like she had won. All the while I made quiet preparations. This wasn't just for her. It was a lesson for the entire HOA board. As the days went on, I played the part of the good neighbor. I kept my head down while Karen relished her newfound authority, harassing the neighbors and doling out fines for minor infractions, like grass growing too tall or porch lights not being the exact shade of white she deemed acceptable. I could feel the tension in the air, but I didn't let it distract me. Then came the perfect moment. It was the night of one of Karen's infamous HOA meetings. She loved these events, forcing homeowners to sit through 2 hours of her self-congratulatory speeches about why everyone needed to repaint their mailboxes to match her house's trim. That night she was just getting started, droning on about her latest ridiculous demands when I made my final adjustments. At exactly 8 p.m., just as Karen was deep into her tirade about repainting the mailboxes, I pressed the final button on my control panel. The entire neighborhood went dark. It was glorious. A chorus of confused voices echoed through the night air as the HOA meeting came to a screeching halt. The streetlights, porch lights, security cameras, even Karen's obnoxiously bright chandelier that she insisted made her living room look like a palace. All flickered off at once. Panic set in. Homeowners stumbled out of their homes, some already dialing customer service, others yelling across lawns to see if anyone knew what had happened. I stood on my front porch, sipping a cold beer, watching the chaos unfold. After about 10 minutes of shouting, Karen decided to take charge. She stomped over to her assistant, a frazzled man named Richard, and snapped her fingers. "Call the electric company. I want an explanation now." Richard fumbled with his phone, muttering under his breath before holding it up to his ear. A few moments later, he frowned. "They're saying there's no outage in the area. No service issues." Karen whipped around, her eyes wide. "That's impossible. Look around. Do you see any lights on?" I knew it was time to make my move. I walked casually toward the crowd, feigning concern, just like everyone else. "Strange, isn't it?" I mused aloud. "An outage that only affects the HOA neighborhood and nowhere else in town?" Karen's eyes narrowed. "What do you know about this?" I shrugged. "I know that the power grid here isn't controlled by the city. It's private." I let the words hang in the air for a moment, enjoying the slow dawning of realization on Karen's face. Richard gulped audibly. "Wait, private? Then who?" I smiled. "Me." The crowd fell silent, a few neighbors gasping in surprise while others exchanged confused glances. Karen's face twisted, clearly struggling to process what she had just heard. "What do you mean, you?" she snapped. I pulled out my phone, casually showing her a scanned copy of the property deed and utility records. "Go ahead, read it." Karen snatched the phone from my hand, her eyes darting across the document as her face cycled through a range of emotions: confusion, disbelief, horror. The color drained from her cheeks. "This can't be right," she whispered. "The HOA doesn't own it," I corrected, slipping my phone back into my pocket. "Turns out the developer sold off the power grid with part of the land years ago, and I bought that land." Richard let out a low whistle. "So you can turn it back on, right?" I nodded. "Of course, but I don't feel like it." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Neighbors who had once been afraid of Karen were now eyeing her with suspicion. The realization had hit home. Karen had poked the wrong bear. She tried to maintain her composure, but it was too late. Her reign was over. The crowd grew restless as Karen's composure started to crack. She could no longer maintain her smug attitude. "You can't do this! This is extortion!" she yelled, pointing an accusing finger at me. I took another sip of my beer, enjoying the moment. "I don't have to do anything," I said coolly. "But I'll make you a deal. I'll turn the power back on right now if you agree to two things." Karen's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What things?" I gave her a casual shrug, knowing she was already losing control. "First, you will personally replace every single solar panel you destroyed, at your own expense. No HOA funds, no sneaky fines against other homeowners. Your money." Karen's lips thinned as she clenched her fists. "Second," I continued, "you resign as HOA president. Tonight." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. People had long been fed up with Karen's iron-fisted rule, and now they were seeing the opportunity to finally get rid of her. Karen's eyes bulged. "You can't be serious." "Fine," I said, not giving her an inch. "Enjoy the blackout." The murmurs of agreement from the crowd grew louder. Some neighbors who had been previously afraid to speak up were now voicing their support. One by one, people started to raise their hands in favor of Karen stepping down. It was a quiet rebellion, but it was powerful. Jeff, the guy with the gnome collection, was the first to stand up. "You know what? I second that. Let's vote." Karen's face twisted with disbelief. She had expected obedience, not rebellion. "A vote? Right now?" "Yeah, a vote. All in favor of Karen resigning," Jeff announced. Hands slowly started to rise, and then more confidently. A few seconds later, the decision was clear. Karen was done. Her face turned bright red with fury. "You ungrateful traitors!" she shrieked, her voice cracking in anger. I didn't say another word. Instead, I took my phone out of my pocket, tapped a button, and instantly the lights returned to everyone's house, except Karen's. The neighborhood lit up. Porch lights flickered back to life. Street lamps hummed, and the warmth of electricity buzzed through the streets. The people cheered, relieved that the blackout was finally over. But Karen's house remained shrouded in darkness. She stood frozen in the middle of the street, her face a mix of disbelief and outrage. "Turn my power back on," she demanded, her voice trembling. I took my time finishing my beer, enjoying the satisfaction of watching her squirm. "No," I said simply. Her forehead veins pulsed with anger. "This is illegal. You can't cut off my electricity." I smiled, enjoying the irony. "I didn't cut off your electricity. The grid's back on. Everyone else has power. If your house isn't getting any, maybe you should check with the HOA. "Oh, wait, you were the HOA. A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd. Karen's face flushed crimson with embarrassment. But she wasn't done yet. She stormed back toward her house, furiously dialing her phone. "I'll get an electrician over here." "You won't get away with this," she hissed. But the electricians had already been warned. They had no intention of coming to her rescue. She stomped back down the street, looking like a defeated animal, her shoulders slumped in frustration. "They're all booked," she gritted out. "4 weeks. I can't get anyone." I pretended to be surprised. "That's crazy. Almost like no one wants to deal with HOA nonsense, huh? Who would have thought?" In truth, I had spoken to the electricians earlier in the day and let them know there might be a certain power-abusing ex-president looking for help. They had all agreed to stay unavailable. Karen had spent years finding people in the service industry for the smallest infractions. Now she was learning the hard way how that kind of behavior comes back to bite you. Without her power, without her title, Karen was nothing. She was just another homeowner, isolated and powerless. And the worst part was that no one in the neighborhood cared anymore. People who had once feared her now mocked her. Some even came up to me, shaking my hand in appreciation for what I had done. Finally, Karen admitted defeat. She turned, shoulders slumped, and walked away without saying another word. The woman who had ruled this neighborhood for so long had finally lost her grip. Days passed, and Karen kept a low profile. She tried to rally support from the neighbors, but no one was interested in helping her anymore. People had grown tired of her antics. A few weeks later, I woke up to see a moving truck in her driveway. By noon, Karen was gone. She had left the neighborhood, defeated, a shadow of the woman who had once held so much power. Later that night, I made one final adjustment to the power grid. Karen's house lit up again, but it was too late for her to enjoy it. She was gone, and so was her reign of terror. With the HOA under new management, I installed a new solar panel system, reinforced and under legal protection that not even the HOA could touch. The neighborhood began to change. People felt lighter, freer. The ridiculous rules that had once governed every aspect of their lives began to fade away. It was as if the oppressive weight had been lifted. To celebrate, I hosted a neighborhood barbecue. It had been years since anyone had come together without fear of fines or Karen's watchful eye. People showed up, not out of obligation, but because they wanted to. It was a good night. And just for fun, I installed one last addition, a solar-powered spotlight aimed directly at Karen's old house. Every night at sunset, the spotlight would switch on, bathing her old property in a warm golden glow, a reminder of what happens when you mess with the wrong guy. Lesson from the story. This story serves as a powerful reminder about power dynamics and how easily those who abuse their power can be brought down. Karen believed she was invincible because of her position in the HOA, but in the end, her actions caught up with her. The real power lies in knowledge, strategy, and knowing when to act. Patience and preparation are often the key to winning battles, and the lesson is clear. Don't let anyone with a sense of entitlement walk all over you, especially when they're in the wrong. Additionally, the story highlights the importance of standing up for what's right, even when the odds seem stacked against you. It's not always about legal victories, it's about the moral high ground. And sometimes those who act in the best interest of the community, not the few, end up winning in the end.